But we start tonight with Donald Trump's decision to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Change Accord. The United States will become one of only 3 countries in the world to oppose the agreement. On Friday, Environment Minister Catherine McKenna spoke to reporters and announced that the Trudeau government has tabled a motion in the House of Commons asking MPs from all parties to vote in support of the Paris Agreement.
I think it's very important that Canada signals its very strong support for the Paris Agreement. That's why next week there's a motion in the House which I hope all members will support, quite frankly. The Conservative Party has said it supports the Paris Agreement. I think it's now time for all Canadian parliamentarians to step up and support the Paris Agreement. I certainly hope that they will vote in favor, because it's important that we show that Canadians are united. I know that Canadian provinces, cities, labour activists, environmentalists, Indigenous peoples all support climate action, and so we're looking forward to seeing the support of the House.
Well, joining me now to look at a very busy week in federal politics are 3 MPs from the different parties. Stephen McKinnon is a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Public Works and the Liberal MP for the Quebec riding of Gatineau. Michael Cooper is a Conservative MP for the riding of St. Albert, Edmonton, and Sheila Malcolmson is the NDP member for the Vancouver Island riding of Nanaimo Ladysmith. All 3 of you, welcome. Thanks for taking the time. Let's start off with Donald Trump. I mean, the world is still talking about Donald Trump's decision, his decision to pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement. Steve McKinnon, we heard that the Prime Minister spoke with President Trump yesterday on the phone. He expressed his deep disappointment that the U.S. is pulling out. How concerned, though, should Canadians be that our biggest trading partner is now going to be dropping emission standards and making it more difficult for us to compete with them?
Well, it remains to be seen if in fact those impacts are those that occur. What I can say is that Canada is determined to be on the front lines of the fight against climate change. We've put forward a very credible plan. We continue to be a constructive intervener and a constructive negotiator for the heavy work that, it must be said, lays ahead in terms of finalizing the Paris arrangements. But Canada is determined to be a constructive player, along with virtually every other country on earth, the signatories to the Paris Accord. You know, the Americans will do what their elected government decides to do, but Canada has charted a course, and it is resolutely a course that will align with the values and the expectations of virtually the entire planet. Paris was a monumental accomplishment for the world, and Canada is determined to not only be among those nations, but to be a leader among those nations.
But should we be concerned, though, that the United States, I mean, with whom we do 80% of our trade, corporations in the United States may not be hindered in the near future by emission standards that Canada is striving towards? Well,
we're of course keeping very close eye on those sorts of things. What I think is emerging from the U.S. is a very real groundswell of both carbon-emitting industries, whether it be Exxon or Shell, or new companies like Tesla or Apple, or states, cities, governors, you name it, who are coming forward with all sorts of proactive measures. So I'm very, very confident that Canada will find its way among all of these technology advancers, will become a leader in renewable energy, and that the continent will continue to play a part no matter what occurs at the national level of U.S. politics.
Okay, Michael Cooper and Sheila Malcolmson, let's start first of all with the fact that you'll be debating a resolution or a motion next week before the House of Commons, motion reiterating support for the Paris Agreement. Michael Cooper, you have a new leader. During the leadership race, the Conservative leadership race, most of the candidates rejected a carbon tax. Where should the Canadian government be going on this? Should the Canadian government be sticking to its current course, or is your Conservative Party now saying it should be changing policies?
Well, the developments out of Washington this week underscore the need for the Liberals to scrap their massive carbon tax. It is a tax that is one of the largest tax increases in Canadian history. It's going to hit businesses across the country hard, including small businesses, and what that means is it's going to kill jobs. Look, the last thing that Canada needs are more liberal tax increases, including the carbon tax, which is undermining Canada's competitiveness, which in turn undermines jobs, growth, and prosperity.
So has your party determined where it stands on how Canada should meet its Paris Agreement targets?
Well, look, this government has created a lot of uncertainty in terms of its so-called climate change plan. As a result, and I don't mean to say so-called climate change, I mean we take the business of climate change very, very seriously, but let me be very clear that what the Liberals have not done is been clear in terms of what their plan looks like, and that has created a lot of uncertainty. And as a result, businesses are sitting on the sidelines, which is undermining jobs and it's undermining investment.
Will your party, just on the resolution next week, or the motion next week, will your party be able to vote in favor? It just basically reiterates support for the fight against climate change and the Paris Agreement.
I haven't read the motion, and we will obviously have that discussion next week.
Okay, Sheila Malcolmson, your reaction, how should the Canadian government be reacting to this situation with Donald Trump pulling out of the Paris Agreement?
We can't control what Donald Trump does, and we've got problems here at home. The Liberal Party still is using the Harper Conservative climate change targets. That's a problem. They took $1 billion out of climate change action in their budget last month. And we just had a report released yesterday by the Columbia Institute for Civic Governance saying only 28% of the climate commitments of the government have actually been acted on. So we've got a lot of work to do at home. Canada's going to feel impacts of climate change hard, whether it's agriculture, forestry. We're seeing this in BC already. And we feel confident that the country's going to benefit from innovation and jobs in the renewable, sustainable, green jobs industry. So we want the country to get on with it and put the good intentions into real action.
Okay, Steve McKinnon, Sheila Malcolmson refers to BC. I want to turn us now to the other really big story this week, and that is BC. The Green Party and the NDP leaders in BC signing a power sharing agreement. They are paving the way. They intend to try at the first opportunity to bring down Christy Clark's Liberal minority government. They're both opposed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Is the federal government concerned that a new provincial government, which is opposed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline, may well be able to, by whatever means, provincial permits or whatever, block the Kinder Morgan pipeline?
Well, the Kinder Morgan pipeline was approved under a regulatory process, which was then reviewed itself by British Columbians, by Aboriginal representatives, by business representatives, and the facts, the evidence, the science, with conditions, pointed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline being in the national interest. You know, it's interesting that we talk about these two subjects, Paris and the Kinder Morgan pipeline. The fact that we have a credible climate, climate change policy allows the Kinder Morgan pipeline and projects that get our resources to market to advance, and that we get through these processes and determine that the national interest is served by getting our resources to market, all at the same time saying to the world and presenting a plan to the world where we have targets, real targets, and yes, certainty, unlike what Michael says. Certainty, if you go to the oil patch, they're saying, we want to know the rules of the road. We want to understand what the regulatory framework will be. The uncertainty is caused by New Democrats who say, forget about those legal processes, or by Conservatives who say, we'll blow up any action against climate change. What we are saying, the middle of the road trajectory that this government is on, is fact-based, science-based regulatory processes that get our resources to market, coupled with credible, hard targets on greenhouse gas emissions that give our industry and Canadians certainty and make sure that we can participate constructively in the fight, the worldwide fight against climate change.
Michael Cooper, the Conservative Party, I know at one point, the day after the announcement, or the day of the announcement, your former leader, Ron Ambrose, said she was of the opinion that Kinder Morgan wouldn't go ahead. What's your party's thinking on whether Kinder Morgan will go ahead?
Well, first of all, with respect to Steve's comments that somehow Conservatives aren't committed to climate change, it's just absolute nonsense. For 9.5 years, the Conservative government showed how Canada can lead on climate change, balancing with the need to grow the economy and the environment. and we saw a real reduction in CO2 emissions under Conservative leadership of some 3.5%.
On Kinder Morgan.
Well, with respect to Kinder Morgan, what we need right now is leadership from the Prime Minister. We need the Prime Minister to champion Kinder Morgan. The Prime Minister is very good about talking about pipelines when he meets with oil executives in Houston or when he comes to my home province of Alberta. But when it comes to going to British Columbia and selling Kinder Morgan to a more skeptical population, the Prime Minister's silence has been deafening. And so, unless the Prime Minister steps up and makes the case to British Columbians, I am very concerned in the face of the political developments that are going on at the provincial level that Kinder Morgan will not be built. Okay,
Sheila Malcolmson, on behalf of the NDP, this is an interesting one because you have two NDP governments, one in place and one soon to be in place probably. The NDP government of Rachel Notley in Alberta is desperately in favour of Kinder Morgan. The NDP government to be in BC says it will do all it can to block it. From the federal NDP, I don't want to hear about process. I do want to hear about whether the federal NDP has decided whether it supports Kinder Morgan or not.
Oh, if you listened to the debate in the House all day yesterday, you'd be absolutely clear that we are opposed to the pipeline expansion and we're opposed to the oil tanker traffic. For BC's coast, the Kinder Morgan oil tanker traffic increase is all downside, no upside. And this is a process that was approved under Harper's rules, and so it was kind of breathtaking that the Liberals went ahead and broke their election promise.
So to your Alberta colleagues, what do you say to your Alberta colleagues?
John Horgan, 60% of people in the province of BC voted for parties that expressly campaigned to kill the Kinder Morgan approval that Trudeau put in place. And I think Horgan's going to be a really strong leader for BC and stand up for the coast and stand up for righting some of the wrongs around process and Indigenous relationships, all of it. And I really salute Rachel Notley's leadership representing her own region, but also putting in place a climate change framework that nobody else has been able to do, an alliance between Labour, First Nations, environmentalists, and...
But are they wrong-headed in supporting Kinder Morgan?
They're each strong leaders looking after their own interests. That's what democracy is. And if the legislature does turn to the NDP and Green cooperative government in order to lead BC forward and put in place policies that British Columbians voted for and that will benefit British Columbians, I'm confident that those strong leaders are going to be able to talk to each other and find some way to get along. Okay,
last question, because this is the one that really has everyone talking, and I want a 30-second answer from each of you. Philippe Couillard, Premier of Quebec, this week said he was reopening a consultation on getting Quebec to sign the Constitution. So he's reopening the constitutional issue. In 30 seconds or less, each of you. Stephen McKinnon, on behalf of the Prime Minister on Thursday said no. He said a flat no. I don't want to reopen the constitutional discussion. Is that the right approach?
Well, I'm a Quebec MP. Let's just review what Mr. Couillard said. What he said was we were extending a hand to Quebec, and Quebec needs to be better integrated in Canadian institutions.
But on the Prime Minister's answer.
Quebec needs to be more present in all Canadian institutions, and as a federalist, I can only be very, very happy about that. One of the elements, of course, was a proposal on constitutional affairs, and we've been very clear that we are not going to reopen constitutional negotiations. We are focused on jobs, the middle class, and that's what we'll continue to be focused on. And Mr. Couillard's been focused on that too, and it's yielded real positive dividends, this cooperation that we have with the province of Quebec.
Okay, in a word, Michael Cooper, the subject that refuses to die, the Constitution in Quebec, your position on it?
Well, I think the statement from Premier Couillard highlights how badly the Prime Minister has handled federal-provincial relations. Under our Conservative government, we presided over 9.5 years of constitutional peace in which we respected Quebec, including recognizing Quebec as a nation, including giving Quebec a seat at the table at UNESCO, and in terms of solving the fiscal imbalance. And I don't believe that there's an appetite to reopen the Constitution, but the fact that Premier Couillard is talking about it, I think, highlights the failure of leadership on the part of the Prime Minister.
Okay, Sheila Malcolmson, last word to you. The Prime Minister said no to reopening discussions on the Constitution. Is it the right approach?
Quebec asked to have a conversation to reopen discussion, and that the Prime Minister shut them down flat yesterday is breathtaking, really. This is to bring Quebec inside the Canadian family fully is something that we'd all like to see, and absolutely that has to start with discussion. So why Trudeau close that discussion down without a breath? I'm bewildered, honestly.
Okay, to all three of you, I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to wish you force and energy for the next week, because you have another week of midnight sittings. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mark.
Mark.
Bye now.